But I think it also means big companies and consumers collectively working together to recycle better.
Hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage? It is not often that one finds a customer who is even more passionate probably than you about sustainability. I was at a conference in London and all the crisp, or as they would call it in US, chips packets there appeared to be made out of paper and also proudly claimed to be vegan. The company was called the British Chip Company. On meeting the founder, Tom Locke, there was even more than met the eye. The potatoes were sustainably sourced, all energy used was renewable, and they chose to sell only in independent stores. We, of course, got talking about all the possibilities for further evolving packaging and working towards lowering of impact. We get to see things here from a customer's perspective and from a user's perspective and learn more about their challenges. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Hello. I'm so happy today to have Tom Locke. This is actually a first, Tom, because we've been wanting to have somebody from the user side of the packaging universe, and it's great to have you on the show. So Tom is the managing director of British Snack Company and the founder. And we met a little while back in Rethinking Materials. So thank you, Tom, for agreeing to join us.
My pleasure. Good to be on.
Great. Tom, let's start in the beginning. You've, of course, gone ahead and made it your mission to be sustainable. But let's start right at childhood. Were there things that influenced you in this journey that you think today have shaped your life?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was born in the 90s, early 90s, 1990 actually. So I feel like I'm getting old, but I'm certainly of an age where the environment has been a common theme throughout my life, which is perhaps not the case for perhaps the generation above or a couple of generations above. So I guess, I've been influenced by a lot of the talk about global warming, which has been taking place for a long time now, and certainly it was a theme when I was growing up. Maybe less so when I was in my early childhood, but certainly through my teens and 20s, it was all over the news. So I think it's something that me and my generation are much more conscious of.
And why the love for snacks? How did that come about?
Well, who doesn't like snacks? Firstly, I mean, everyone loves
I am
snacks, right?
definitely in that club.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is one of the good things I think about being in the food and drink industry, but also more specifically in the snack industry is snacking is pretty universal. I think something like 96% of the UK population snack regularly on savoury snacks. So, one of the things I enjoy about the snack industry and the food industry is just how universal it is, how you can talk to anyone about food and drink, and you can talk to anyone about snacks, and they will have a strong opinion on what their favorite snack is or what their favorite food is. And, not to disparage any other professions, but I actually started off training to be an accountant. And I feel like that's something, when you say I'm an accountant, people's eyes sort of glaze over and they think, oh God, why did I ask that? Whereas one of the things I enjoy about being in the snack industry is whoever I talk to about it, they generally have a lot of questions about it, and we can have an easy, free flowing conversation about it. But that's not necessarily the reason I got into snacks. I mean, the reason I got into snacks was I actually started making. I was a big fan of pork scratchings. I've always have been, which is a pretty specific UK snack. They do have versions of it across the world, but I was always a fan of pork scratchings, and there weren't any pork scratchings. Or let me put it this way: I think when I launched my first product, and my first brand, which was Awfully Posh Pork Scratchings, there weren't any premium ones, and all of the ones, generally, it always used to be a pub snack in the UK. You can buy it in almost every supermarket now, but historically it's been a pub snack, and I used to go into a pub Obviously, only when I was 18. But I used to go into a pub and I'd order a pint and a pack of pork scratchings. I used to like it. I still do, of course. Although I've eaten so many over the years that my appetite for them has waned somewhat, if I'm being honest. I'd order a pint and a packet of pork scratchings, and I just there was a little part of me that thought that I could do a better job than what was out there, and so I started making pork scratchings in my mum's kitchen and selling them from the boot of my car to local pubs, and that's how the British Snack Company came into life.
And I, of course, have no idea about pork scratchings, even though I have lived in UK for some time. But I'm a vegan boy now, so
Yeah.
it doesn't hit my horizons. But if you think if you talk a little more about pork scratching, is this like a well branded product, or it's a very kind of pub created, locally made kind of product?
I think historically pork scratchings were they were sort of a black country snack. So black country is an area in the Midlands, and the history of pork scratchings is somewhat unwritten, really. But if you do try and dig into it, then the consensus is that they were spawned. They were invented in the Black Country as a way to use up parts of the pig that might otherwise, not be used. I think they were always, maybe 100 years ago or maybe 50 years ago, they were quite a regional snack that you might only find in the Black Country or in the Midlands. But certainly now they're all over the UK, and we export them across the world. So they're clearly growing in popularity. I think some of that is down to the rise of like keto diets and high protein diets, because they're pork scratchings done properly should be, they should be quite high in fat, but also very high in protein and very low in carbohydrates. So, yeah, I mean, historically they've been a pub snack, but now people buy them. We sell them in supermarkets across the UK, so people buy them for consumption at home as well. But yeah, they probably did start in 20 or 30 years ago, maybe. They were probably more of a pub snack, but certainly they're becoming more mainstream now.
That's interesting to know. This is a wonderful name from my perspective. Awfully posh. How did that come about?
It was always supposed to be tongue in cheek, because the idea was that, can you really have a posh pork scratching? Because it's such a historically a working class sort of pub snack. Can they really be awfully posh? So it was always intended to be a tongue in cheek name. Um, some people get that, some people don't, I think. But it's a name, and maybe it's because I've been saying it for 10 years, but I think it's a name that rolls off the tongue quite nicely, awfully posh. Whilst it was supposed to be tongue in cheek, and still is supposed to be tongue in cheek, as is the tone of voice for that brand. Ultimately, we try and create the most premium version of a pork scratching that we possibly can. And so we use exclusively fresh pork, whereas most pork scratching manufacturers will use frozen pork. We use what we call prime cuts of pork, so actual prime cuts of pork, whereas most pork scratching manufacturers use off cuts, from the bacon industry often. And so yes, it's half tongue in cheek, but it's the other half is, they are as good a pork scratchings as you can buy, in my humble opinion, of course.
Of course. And I was thinking there'll be a fun story like you guys were all sitting together, drunk, and finding out names and something like that. But
There's some truth to that, Ved. There is some truth to that.
there
Yeah.
is, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
What should we call this thing? Okay, let me call this as this, and something comes up, and everybody goes, "Yep, that's it."
Yeah. Yeah.
Tom, it seems like you started in your entrepreneur's journey relatively early. So talk to me about that. Why did that come about? Everybody doesn't want to be an entrepreneur, and we know the rigors of entrepreneurship. How old were you when you started your first awfully posh, venture? And why was it? What was it in you that made you desire this path?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, and I don't recommend it for everyone either. It's not an easy job at times. But I started it when I was 21, And I sort of fell into it, really. I knew I wanted to start a business, but I didn't know what business I wanted to start. I went to university. I was studying law at university at the London School of Economics. Absolutely hated it. I didn't graduate. I dropped out. I just couldn't get with it. It was as dull as dishwater to me. And then I started training to be an accountant with Deloitte, which is a big accountancy firm in the UK, and probably hated that, if not as much, more than the law degree that I was trying to do. I quit both of those things, and I was living at home, and I think I was under a little bit of pressure to actually do something with my life by my parents. I decided that I was going to start a business. I had no idea what business I was going to start. Then, as you alluded to a moment ago, I was in a pub, and all good stories do start in a pub, they say in the UK. And I was in a pub. I was eating pork scratchings, and they were in a clear bag. They were pretty grim. A lot of pork scratchings, ours don't, but a lot of pork scratchings have sort of hair on them, and they're full of sort of MSG and quite nasty ingredients. And I thought, I think I can do a better job. I think I could do a better job than this. And I just started experimenting in my mum's kitchen, and they went down well. Started flogging them from the boot of my car to local pubs, cash in hand. And I gave them away for free initially. I would go into pubs, and I'd say, look, just try these out. I'm local. Just try them out for me. And I gave them away free. And when the phone started ringing saying, oh, no, we got rid of all of those, they were quite good. I thought, okay, maybe I'm on something. But when I really realized that I was on something is when I got a call from Harvey Nichols, who were our first sort of retail listing. They called me up and they said, oh, we tried your pork scratchings in a pub and we really want to sell them. And I thought, great, okay, I'm clearly on something here, Harvey Nichols. I mean, and Harvey Nichols is a great account to supply. It really is very prestigious, what I call a trophy account. But at the time when I, being relatively new to business, when I got a call from Harvey Nichols, I thought, oh, well, that's it. I've made it now. I'm going to be rich, not realizing that, Harvey Nichols, is as prestigious as it is just one. I think they've got a couple, but just one shop in London. I think the first delivery I delivered in, I called up the buyer afterwards, said, oh, how's it selling? They said, oh, it's selling really well. We sold 10 bags in the first week. And that's when I thought, okay, well, I'm going to need more than just a Harvey Nichols to make some money. But it was a great start nonetheless.
Yeah, that's a funny story. 10 bags in a week. You're doing really
But
well.
they were happy with that.
But tell me this, when you started selling from the boot of the car, presumably there were lots of laws in UK as in the rest of the world with food security and, all that. Was it easy enough to kind of do this thing without having all those tick marks against those boxes, or was that kind of sketchy?
Well, again, in my youthful naivety, I didn't realize about all of that. And so one day, I remember my mum got a knock on the door from the local environmental health officer. They sort of said, "Oh, is it true that you're making pork scratchings here?" And sort of said, "Yeah, no, it's true." And they said, "Well, you need to register your premises with your local authority, and you need to have food accreditation, etc." Oh, I didn't realize that. That's news to me. We haven't got any of that, and that's when I approached a factory in the UK to get them to make them for me. They weren't made in my mum's kitchen for long, and EHA made sure of that.
Yeah, I can imagine it must have been a funny thing for EHA that, suddenly somebody's making something in the kitchen and selling it out of the boot of the car and it's moving. So I guess if it wasn't moving, it wouldn't have bothered them. But,
yeah, quite.
So, okay, so you go into pork scratchings, which is kind of a niche, it seems, still. But then there's a mainstream thing that you take up, which is like potato chips, all the big honchos of the world are doing this. So what crazy idea in your head came to this conclusion that I'm going to take this on?
Well, I very quickly realised that as much as I love pork scratchings, and there are lots of others that do like pork scratchings, not enough people like pork scratchings for it to be able to be the product that makes me my millions. And I'm still waiting to make my millions, by the way, but maybe I will one day. But I soon realised that the pork scratching market was too small. As you say, it's not mainstream. So I turned my attention to, so the pork scratching market is worth about 40 million, 50 million, I think, in the UK. I turned my attention, to what we call in the UK crisps or potato chips, which is like £1 billion market in the UK. So much bigger prize. What comes with that bigger market though is much more competition, and it's a cutthroat market. You've got big players out there with very deep pockets. But so I decided that next I was going to launch a crisp brand, which I did. Yeah, and now our crisp business is probably 10 times the size of our pork scratching business. Yeah, makes sense.
But this is such a kind of this industry is already there's so much out there.
Mm.
What was it that you felt that you could differentiate? Because you would have to, right? You can't just go into an industry which is already quite intense and then try and sell the same thing. So I'm sure there was something in your mind which you felt that this is going to be different from Kettle or the Lay's or etc.
Mm.
etc.
Yeah, you're quite right. I mean, whereas when I launched Awfully Posh Pork Scratchings, we were the first premium one. By the time I launched my crisp brands, there were many premium crisp brands already. The likes of Tyrrell's and Kettle, people like that. And so I did look for a USP, and the USP that I settled on was, so in the UK you've got sort of your national crisp brands like the two I just mentioned, and there are others. Walker's another one, of course, although they don't really do kettle chips, or hand cooked crisps. There are also lots of regional crisp brands. So, for example, there's one called Kent Crisps, there's one called Lancashire Crisps, and there are others. It's almost as if every county has its own crisp brand. But there wasn't a crisp brand sort of that focused on London, and so I decided to launch a brand called the London Crisp Company. And I partnered with a manufacturer in London to make them for me. The idea was that we'd be London's local crisp, which was, I thought, a good enough USP to sort of carve a chunk of the market out. And it turned out it was, and we launched the brand to great success in London, getting listings with Fuller's Pubs, which is a pub group that we very famous London pub group, and it's a pub group that we still supply to this day. And we got listings in some of the regional, the London stores of some of the major supermarkets. But I very quickly realised, and it took me by surprise actually, but I quickly realised that trying to sell something branded as London to Londoners works fine, but trying to sell something branded as London to anyone outside of a 50-mile radius of London is quite difficult. And it surprised me because we have brands in the UK like Yorkshire Tea, which are obviously, they've got, they're made in Yorkshire, or packed in Yorkshire. I suppose the tea's not grown in Yorkshire, but they're made in Yorkshire, and it's a regional brand. But I think it's the best-selling tea brand in the UK now. So it works in reverse, but trying to sell something branded London to someone in Yorkshire is quite difficult because there's this sort of mistrust of, I wouldn't, or maybe hatred, although I'm not sure I'd go that far, but there's certainly this skepticism around London from other corners of the UK. Whilst we did very well in London initially, it was quite difficult to then sell the brand outside of London. So we decided to shift our focus from London to Britain. And whereas when we were the London Crisp Company, all of our flavours and each of our flavours was inspired by a different neighbourhood of London. When we became the British Crisp Company, to try and be more inclusive, every flavour was inspired by sort of a different British theme, if you like. So we had a flavour, salt and vinegar, for example, was inspired by British seaside towns, because obviously salt and vinegar is, you have it on your fish and chips when you go to the seaside. So we just tried to make the brand more inclusive, so that to allow us to grow nationally, which did work, because you can now find our crisps all over the country.
That's amazing. It reminded me when you mentioned Yorkshire tea. I was studying in London and I wanted good tea.
Yeah.
And there was a friend of mine who used to be a tea taster. And I'm sure from your British background, you'll know that's a sophisticated job, of really getting the taste right. And he was visiting, and he used to be in Kolkata, which used to be the hub of the Assam and the Darjeeling kind of teas. And as we were chatting, I said, ultimately I have to go to a supermarket and buy tea, but I want a good one. I need a wholesome kind of flavor.
Sure.
And he said, Yorkshire Gold. And this,
Yes.
I'm talking about 95, you were just a toddler then. So I'm talking early, mid 90s. And he said, Yorkshire Gold. And he said the tea is so good that one bag would easily make you 2 mugs. And it was true. And I used Yorkshire Gold all through my time in London. And it was surprisingly amazing tea. So each time I go back to London, I still get a box of Yorkshire Gold,
Really?
which is
Yeah.
such a funny story when you were talking about
I
it.
mean, I'm almost begrudged to admit it because it almost sounds un-British, but I don't actually drink tea.
Oh my gosh. You sent it all to India.
Yeah.
We drink tea all the time. So, yeah, but tell me this difference. You come out with this tongue-in-cheek brand called Awfully Posh, and then you go very straight on British Snack Company.
Mm.
What was the story and the flip there? Why did you decide to go with a very sort of solid standard kind of term for your British for your chip company?
I think it's a good question. I'm not sure I have a great answer for it. I mean, everything I've done since I started the business has sort of been learning on the job, and you know, it was just an instinctive decision I made, I guess. But I think crisps are quite conventional. They suit perhaps a more conventional name. That might be the reason I would give, but I don't know. I mean, I did toy with the idea actually of launching crisps under the Awfully Posh brand, which is the first brand that I started. But the problem was, and some of the feedback I got was, well, what's different about that? Whereas because we were the first premium pork scratching when we launched, what's different about Awfully Posh crisps? Because aren't Tyrrells and Kettle just posh versions of normal potato crisps? So I quite liked the idea, and I still do, of having two different brands. Whereas a lot of people say to me, "Why do you have two different brands? Why not just do it all under one brand? Because then you need to have two lots of social media handles. You need to have, you've got to market two brands rather than one. You're doubling your workload from a marketing perspective." And there is some weight behind that argument, but I quite like the idea of having two different brands because ultimately now those two brands have quite different strategies. So our British Chris Company brand, for example, is only sold in what we call the out of home market, so food service, so pubs, hotels, coffee shops. Whereas our Awfully Posh brand is sold in those places, but also in supermarkets.
Yeah, and then this takes us well to the what I would have said meat and potatoes of the conversation, but I'm going to call it the pork and chips of the conversation. So,
Okay.
so the pork and chips of the conversation, and it's really refreshing to see you take sustainability with such vigor. In our reading, it is the way the potatoes are grown, the way they are processed, the way they are packaged. Why did this happen, and what made you uh, go this route where you kind of chose that you're going to do things in a certain way?
Well, less cynically, being sustainable is obviously just the right thing to do for everyone, for the environment, and for the people. So, that's the less cynical argument. But obviously, slightly more cynically is sustainability does sell these days, and so in a very crowded market, being more sustainable allows you to stand out from your competitors. Sustainability is a selling point. So, and we're up against, in all of the markets we operate in, we're up against very, very big players. And whilst those big players often make the right noises about sustainability, often their actions don't live up to their words in my view. So, being sustainable is the right thing to do. Being as sustainable as you possibly can be is the right thing to do for obvious reasons. But also it does allow you to stand out from your competitors.
How difficult or easy was it to find the right source for manufacturing those chips in the way you wanted it to be manufactured? Was it easy enough, like to find a sustainably powered factory which locally sourced potatoes and all of that, or was it something that you had to struggle to find?
Not easy. It certainly wasn't easy. So we partner with a great farmer, a potato farmer, who is as passionate, if not more passionate, about sustainability than we are. And so we take the lead from him. I mean, he's his name's Robert. He's a great guy, and his wife Laura. So it's a family farm, family run business. They grow all of their own potatoes. All of the potatoes are fried on that farm, and they do as much as they can to be the most sustainable potato farm and crisp factory in the UK, if not in the world. They've got an anaerobic digestion plant, so that creates energy that they use in the factory. It creates the fertilizer they use in the fields, and they're a great business to work with. But they're unusual in that regard. So they're difficult to find. There aren't many others like them, if any at all.
And why choose not to sell in supermarkets? Why only independent stores? How does that support the business, or is that a moral call? How did that evolve?
Well, my business started in pubs and independent businesses, so I'm passionate about supporting them. That's not the only reason. One of the other reasons is it makes commercials. The problem with supermarkets in the UK, and it's good for consumers in many ways, but the problem is, especially in snacks, but in almost every category in the FMCG market in the UK, it's fiercely competitive and very promotionally driven. So a very large proportion of crisps that are sold in supermarkets in the UK are sold whilst on promotion. I think a lot of consumers don't realise that when they go into a supermarket and buy something on promotion, it's not the supermarket that's funding that promotion; it's the brand, or the brand or the supplier. The supermarket's still making the same percentage margin as they would if it was sold on full price. So, to be able to compete in the supermarkets, in the snacks and in particular the crisp fixture, you need to have very, very deep pockets, because the majority of the crisps you sell are going to be sold at a heavily discounted price, and we don't have those deep pockets, and we have no interest in being involved in a price war or a race to the bottom with the likes of Tyrrell's or Kettle or Pipers. So we're more than happy to let them crack on and have that price war in the supermarkets, and we focus on the out of home market. And what we find is by focusing on that out of home market, the people that we sell our crisps to can sell our crisps for slightly more than they could sell Kettle, Tyrrell's, or Piper's crisps for, because there's no direct price comparison with the supermarkets. So for example, a consumer can go into a Tesco and buy a big bag, 150-gram bag of Tyrrell's crisps, for sort of, £1.50, sometimes even less, or they can buy one, get one free. But generally one of the big brands in a supermarket will be on promotion at any one time. And so that makes it very difficult for pubs, for example, to sell a small 40-gram bag of that same brand for a similar price, because the consumer doesn't think they're getting value, because the consumer might think, well, hang on, I'm paying £1.20 for this small bag, but in the Tesco Express next door, I can get 4 times the amount, whatever the calculation is. I can get triple the amount for a similar price. Whereas, pubs, by selling our brand, pubs can charge a small premium over what they might sell Tyrrell's or Kettle for, because there is not that direct price comparison. But overall, we just like dealing with pubs and hotels, and that's where we built our business, and so we're happy to sort of support them by saying, look, we won't sell our crisps to supermarkets.
What if a supermarket chain came to you as you gain popularity? What if they came to you and said, we want to carry your product, but of course we have a 30% margin, etc., etc., etc.? Would you succumb to that, or would you keep your current kind of model and say that, sorry, dude, no, not selling? What would happen then?
Well, don't back me into a corner, Ved. But look, I think we where we are currently, we wouldn't be able to compete with the likes of Tyrrell's and Kettle. So it wouldn't make commercial sense for us to supply a supermarket at the moment.
Great. So you have this brand, Awfully Posh, that does pork, and and then you have a British snack company that not only is sustainably sourced, sustainably packaged, but it's vegan, and all your
Mm.
flavorings are vegan. So how did that happen? Because that's two ends of the spectrum, and why did you decide on that, going the route of being vegan even with flavorings?
Well, the answer is quite simple to that, I think, and there is no real reason why all crisp flavors can't be vegan, because flavors are created by a flavor house, and they're a big mix. They're a mix of different ingredients that creates a flavor that resembles what. So, for example, I mean, a good example is prawn cocktail. So, it's actually my favorite flavor of crisps. So, prawn cocktail crisps don't really taste like prawns. They taste like the sauce that goes into a prawn cocktail. So there doesn't seem to be any sense to me to actually put prawns into the flavoring, because it's not going to dramatically change. It's not going. You're not going to be able to taste the prawns. But also prawns, are a crustacean, which is an allergen. In the case of cheese and onion, if you put real cheese in, then you're adding milk, which is also an allergen. So the fact that all of our flavors are vegan is driven by the fact that, again, as a brand, we want to be inclusive, but also the fact that by removing dairy from cheese and onion, i.e., cheese, you're also not only making it vegan, you're also making it allergen free, which, and allergens are a very, very big thing in the out of home market now, or well, any market. Allergens are really important, because people have serious allergies. And, when you go to a restaurant these days, one of the first things you get asked is, do you have any allergies? So for us being able to say to a pub group or a hotel chain or a restaurant chain, look, all of our crisps are allergen free and they're all vegan, it just allows them to have faith, have confidence that they can stock our brand, and every single customer that comes in will be able to buy them, unless they have a potato allergy, of course, but I'm not sure that's very common.
The Good Garbage podcast has been brought to you by Paka. Paka has been creating solutions in the food packaging, carry, and service space. Paka utilizes sugarcane residue and upcycles it into amazing products. Their latest offering is a compostable, flexible packaging solution for the chocolate and confectionery industry. The products are available in the Indian subcontinent and in North America now. Paka is also building an end-to-end solutions for customers in the food service and delivery space. For any query, do email at connect@paka.com, and Paka is Pakka. Now, back to the show. But do you think on the flip side, does it also end up annihilating some of the people who don't want anything vegan? Or do you think that's a small number and it doesn't matter?
I haven't heard of anyone complaining that our crisps are vegan. And as I said, I mean, and maybe there are, I don't know. But as I said, if you can create a cheese and onion flavor made with cheese, but the amount of actual cheese that's in there is so small, it doesn't in any way alter the taste. All it does is it acts as it gives some brands some provenance. So, for example, if a brand wants to say, rather than cheese and onion, they want to say West Country cheddar and onion, then they would actually need to use a very, very tiny amount of West Country cheddar powder. But again, you take that West Country cheddar powder out, the flavor of the crisp is materially the same. So, yeah, I mean, I haven't had anyone say, I'm not eating those because they haven't. So, for example, we do a roast beef flavor crisp. Doesn't have any beef in it, but it still tastes as good, if not better, in my view, than every other roast beef flavor crisp out there. Some of which actually do have beef in them, albeit a very small amount. I haven't had anyone, and I'd be surprised if we ever did have someone who says, I'm not eating those because they haven't got beef in them.
Yeah, that's interesting to note from an outside perspective that the chips actually don't have much flavoring from the actual source. And that takes me well towards focus of packaging.
Yeah.
How important is packaging in a chips or a snack? And what have been the challenges for you in order to find the right packaging?
Well, packaging is obviously critical, because it is the thing that keeps the product fresh and ultimately and in good condition. And ultimately, irrespective of brand or flavor, product quality is always number one for I think any food and any food business should put quality, um, you know, at, as their number one priority. So, packaging plays a critical role in that, and but packaging also goes hand in hand with sustainability, of course, because um, uh, most, if not all, snacks are currently packed in plastic packaging, and that plastic packaging is very difficult to recycle. More often than not, it's not recycled for that reason. In the UK, we have most crisp packets, including ours at the moment, although that's soon to change. Say, return to store, and the consumer has to trudge it back to their supermarket and pop it in a little bin. But ultimately, even if the consumer does that, and again, I think not many consumers are aware of this, even if a consumer does do that, 9 times out of 10, if not 99 times out of 100, that pack that they've returned to store won't get recycled, even though they're led to believe that it will be. Bloomberg did a really interesting article, a really interesting piece, where they put tracking devices in pieces of soft flexible plastic, which is sort of the industry term for things like crisp packets, and then posted them into one of those. I'm not going to name and shame the supermarket, but posted them into one of those supermarkets recycling bins at front of store, and then tracked where those pieces of plastic went, and not one of them got recycled. Most of them ended up being lost somewhere, or being burnt, or ended up in landfill. And so packaging is a big problem for the snack industry, and I don't think enough companies in the snack industry are taking it seriously enough. We certainly are, and we hope to be. I think we're leading the charge in terms of what we're doing to try and make our packaging more sustainable and fully recyclable.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear on the Bloomberg side, and I can totally relate to that because it is, in a way, the packaging is so well designed to keep the flavor and the crispiness of the product inside that there is no way to, I wouldn't even call it recycle, downcycle, or to kind of make any use of it post usage. And so it's totally understandable that none of it actually gets to that state.
Mm.
So that actually makes your job a little bit tougher, according to me, with your passion for sustainability. And I remember long time back, maybe even 8 to 10 years back, because we were of course obsessive about changing packaging, and I was talking to one of the key people at General Mills, and we had created this product which was paper based, and it would do the job, and but we were not sure if it would be adequate enough. And he laughed at me and he said, you know what? You have to realize what the dharma of packaging is.
The what?
Ultimately, your dharma is what is the essence
Okay.
of the packaging. And he said, and it really stuck to me. He said that ultimately the essence is to be able to protect what is inside.
Yes.
Because if you don't protect what is inside, then you've created a bigger damage ecologically in terms of potatoes being grown and washed and segregated and transported and cut and cooked, and then if I lose one of the packs, then that's a bigger damage. So the first part is that you have to protect what is inside,
Yes.
and that really struck home for me that this is something that's so important. So taking a cue from there, what are the key parameters that you cannot compromise on when it comes to packaging?
Well, I think that chap hit the nail on the head. Really, I mean, I don't. You can't compromise on anything. In order to the only thing that you could slightly compromise on, I think, and it applies to snacks and other food and drink categories, is shelf life, because, for example, we put 6 months shelf life on our crisps. Now, crisps are a very fast moving item, so we make them, they go almost immediately straight out to customers, like wholesalers, and those wholesalers deliver very quickly to pubs, and those pubs sell very quickly to the consumer. So, do crisps need a 6 month shelf life? Probably not. because whenever I go to a pub and eat a bag of my own crisps, I will look, I will religiously look at the back of the bag to see when it was made. And I obviously know when it was made because I just work backwards. And so if it was made, if it had a best before date on the back of, let's say, May this year, I would know that it was made in December last year, December just gone. So, and whenever I do that, I find that the crisps are almost always within 3 months of their manufacturing date, and more often than not, even shorter than that. Often just a couple of weeks since they were made, because they're a very fast moving good. So the compromise that you can potentially make is on shelf life. Can you find packaging that keeps the crisp perfectly fresh, but for just a slightly shorter period of time? So rather than putting 6 months on, 6 months shelf life on, you put, say, 3 months on, which I think would be enough. But there's nothing else that you can compromise on, because because the product has to be as good when the consumer eats it as the day that they were cooked. So that's really the only compromise that I could think of. But everything else, they've got to maintain their crunch. Another problem with crisps, if they're not properly protected, is the oil will turn rancid. So shelf product quality cannot be compromised at any point. But there is an argument that because the industry's got so used to plastic packaging, that you don't need as long a shelf life as people are putting on. For example, Pringles, Pringles that come in a can, I think they have a 15-month shelf life.
Wow.
Now, in what universe do Pringles actually need a 15-month shelf life? Because their tagline, isn't it, once you pop, you just can't stop. So, generally, if you buy a tube of Pringles, they're going to be gone in a day, if not an hour, right? And that's the same with crisps. As soon as that bag of crisps is open, they're being demolished, right? So that's one of the things we've been looking at is shelf life, and are there materials out there that will keep the crisps as good as they need to be kept, but for just not quite as long as plastic packaging.
And as you've been researching and trying all these different types of packaging, what are the main challenges that you have faced in those trials?
Well, there's lots and lots of challenges. So because it's not just when it comes to packaging, it's not just whether the finished packaging. So once it's formed into a bag, it's not the only consideration as to whether the finished packaging keeps the crisp fresh, because you've also got to think about cost, the cost of that packaging, because if the packaging costs more, ultimately the consumer is going to pay more. But you've also got to think about things like seal strength. Is it, are the seals going to be tight enough to hold air? You've got to think about things like run speed. How quickly can it run down a machine? And they've all got to be as good as plastic for it to work, really, because otherwise you start slowing down the factory, and the more you slow down the factory, the less efficient it becomes, and cost just drives up. And so the holy grail is a material that performs like plastic, but is recyclable. It is recyclable is recyclable. Whereas these flexible plastics simply aren't, really, even though some people tell you they are.
Yeah, and I would go another step and say recyclable in the paper stream and
Yes.
compostable, because paper would be picked up like you are doing. Paper would be picked up 70 to 80% compared
Yes.
to 7 to 8%.
Yes.
As much as polymers would claim that this recycle rate would be between 8 and 10% max.
Yeah.
So, and compared to paper, which is 80%. So
Exactly.
if a customer gets your product, for example,
Mhm.
it feels like paper and
Yeah.
it tears like paper. So my automatic reaction as a customer is put it in the paper pile and
Yeah.
not the poly pile. And that changes everything, right? In terms of rate of recycling.
Exactly. I mean, I think there is a clear trend in the industry to move to paper packaging. And what's interesting is that a lot of products are moving to paper packaging that were always historically in paper packaging and only got moved into plastic for either cost or convenience reasons. And going back to the shelf life point, when crisps were first sold commercially, they were sold in paper bags, you know, and they were sold, and they weren't sealed properly, but because they were sold to be eaten immediately, and therefore they wouldn't need any shelf life really. So the industry is sort of going full circle, and I think what the work that we've been doing on paper packaging, which will be coming to market soon, it does sort of represent the whole industry going full circle. I think going back to paper, and we see it in other categories. Like pasta, rice is now being packed in paper again, where it was always historically packed in paper, got moved to plastic, and now it's going back to paper because, as you say, paper is the most widely recycled material post-consumer.
Yeah, then that's of course music to my ears, and of course many of the listeners who would listen to this conversation. So, staying with cost, when you think of cost as a person who leads a food brand, are you looking at cost as a percentage of total cost? What is the delta that you're ready to accept? If there is a delta that if this costs 6% of my packaging cost is 6% of my total cost, I'm ready to go to 7 or 8. And where does that end? Or do you see it per square meter and say that, okay, this is my total cost. If I was to use a poly-based flexible packaging, I'm willing to pay this much more. Is there a sweet spot for you?
Well, the obvious sweet spot is that it costs exactly the same as plastic, but that's never going to happen. For me, I don't view it that way, and I'm sure one of the reasons that the big brands are not moving to paper is for that exact reason, that they look at it like that. I don't look at it like that. I look at it, the move from plastic to paper is the right thing to do for the reasons that we've discussed, and it will cost what it costs. And I'd rather not focus on the cost, but focus on getting the execution right, i.e. maintaining that product freshness, maintaining that product quality, and not sacrificing on product quality than I would focusing on cost. I'd rather pay whatever it costs to maintain product quality, and then our customers have a simple choice. You either pay more for a product that's one of its kind in fully recyclable paper packaging, or you choose one of our competitors, and there are many of them. And I hope and believe that enough customers will make the right choice that it won't be a problem for us. But maybe I'll be wrong. I don't know.
I hope you won't be. But what is there a percentage of total cost when you're looking at your kind of cost sheet that this is my total packaging cost and I would like it to remain at this much?
Yeah, I think, in terms of the plastic packaging that Chris are packed in, the cost of that packaging is less than 10% of the total cost. So even if the paper alternative costs double, it's doubled its plastic counterpart. Ultimately, the cost to the total the increase to the total cost of goods is relatively modest. I mean, relatively modest. So, it's not like paper costs double what plastic costs, and therefore a bag of crisps is going to double in price. It's going to be modest, but in you've got to remember that we're in the macroeconomic circumstances we're in a cost of living crisis, but also one, and inflation is cooling, obviously, but one where consumers have had to pay a lot more for goods over the past 2 years than they would, rampant inflation, runaway inflation, however you want to describe it. It's almost like it's not great timing in these macroeconomic circumstances to be launching a product that we know is going to cost more. But I hope that it's going to be modest enough. And snacks are they're an impulse purchase. They're a treat, right? So we'll see. Only time will tell. But I think the bottom line really, Ved, is I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and I'm not doing it to make more money. So, and I just hope that enough consumers and trade customers agree that it's the right thing to do to all collectively, sort of share the pain of the increased cost, if you like.
More power to you, Tom. But coming back to the performance side, the two terms that in the packaging circles that I use heavily when it comes to flexible packaging is moisture barrier and
oxygen barrier.
Yes.
Typically, when you look at a poly-based substrate, and I'm getting a little technical, so if it gets too technical,
I
you can stop
I
me.
can get technical
Uh,
with you. Don't worry.
oh, good. So if I look at a poly-based substrate, you get a WVTR or a moisture barrier of under one,
Mhm.
and the same thing with oxygen.
Yeah.
What when we are doing a lot of experimentation, we are finding that if we want to avoid the aluminum as well, so
Yeah.
that it's easy to it'll still decompose and be able to get composted. But if we want it to be recyclable as well, ideally you want to avoid the aluminum as well.
Yes.
And if that is the case, then so far what we found is that if we can move that dial a little bit and say a moisture barrier or a WVTR of under 5 and similar oxygen barrier, in our internal experimentation, it works. We've retained it for 6 months and seen that it works. But at least when we talk to the biggies, the big chocolate companies and the potato chips companies, they just have this norm set. It is going to be under one.
Yeah.
And if it's not, I'm not even going to test it. What is your take on it? And what's your, more than your take, what is your guidance to people who are trying to develop? How much of a stickler do we have to be for those two norms, oxygen and moisture?
Well, I'll answer that, but let me ask you a question first. So, have you done trials on potato crisps with a WVTR and an OTR of over one and found that they last for 6 months?
That's a good question. We have not. We've done it on
Yeah.
chocolates.
So chocolate, I think is a different beast entirely because, and um, ultimately, crisps all savory snacks need a very good WVTR barrier and a very good OTR barrier. Chocolate less so because obviously you can leave chocolate out and not a lot happens to it, right? If you unwrap a bar of chocolate and you leave it on the side and come back to it a couple of days later, it's going to be the same, right? Whereas you leave a bag of crisps out, you go back to it in a couple of hours and they'll be stale. So I don't I don't disagree with whoever you've spoken to in the savoury snacks industry that says you do need a WVTR and an OTR below one for snacks, because you do, and that is a big challenge. It is a big, and because it's ultra high barrier. Essentially, it's ultra high barrier, so it is a big challenge. But for things like chocolate, I don't think you need ultra high barrier. But I share your pain, because the problem is that because the industry's been so used to plastic, a lot of manufacturers don't actually know what barrier values they need to protect their products, because OPP or plastic is the norm, and they just look at the barrier values of of their current plastic packaging and go, well, obviously we've got to have these, and so if it is a WVTR and an OTR below one, that's their default setting. So they look at the spec of their current packaging and go, well, this has got a WVTR below one and an OTR below one, and therefore any alternative also needs a WVTR below one and an OTR below one. Whereas the reality is, I don't think all applications do need that, but for snacks, you do, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's the interesting thing in snacks is also that you want to keep the packaging light. You
Yeah,
don't want to have a heavier. So, it's both those challenges from a packaging perspective that, in a chocolate, I can make it a little thicker and
yeah,
I can put more biopolymers onto it and protect it. Whereas when I'm looking at crisps, you also want it to be not relatively, really flexible,
yeah,
just for the feel of it as well and what the market is used to. So it makes it double challenging. You have to have it thin, and you have to have it with the right barrier, and you still have to have puncture resistance as well,
right.
because you're going to subject it to various kind of stages of, you don't want the customer to get a puncture onto the packaging as well. So there are multiple
Yeah,
issues there.
and you also want it to, for some reason, I think consumers like packaging to feel like plastic. You almost want it to have that crinkle as well. So, yeah, I mean, I'm right with you. It's a big challenge. It's a big challenge.
What about aesthetics and printing? Does that differ? Has that been something that is challenging at all, or is there a plus when you are looking at paper-based substrates?
I think that from a printing perspective, I think you can achieve really really great quality print on paper. So I'm not it's not been something that's bothered us. Um, and I also think, if I put my consumer hat on, I like the feel of paper. I think it feels really premium. Paper feels really premium, I think. So, I think on both counts, paper is a match for plastic, if not better than plastic.
And you mentioned earlier, very, very, and it's a very valid kind of statement on the runnability side,
Yeah,
because we can produce all the great things and get the right barriers. But if it doesn't run at 2000 meters per minute onto
yeah,
the converting machine where it's printing and pouching, it again raises the cost.
yes.
So how much of a challenge has that been in the packaging that you have created for your products?
Big challenge, big challenge. We've had to do significant amount of work and spend significant amounts of time and money getting, running trials, and getting the packaging to run. I mean, so, you know we run our crisp packets at, 80 packs per minute, so that's pretty fast. It's some people do it faster. And if you, even if you run it 10 packs per minute slower, you're then slowing down the factory and it's adding costs. But I think that element is just trial and error. It's trial and error, changing the shape of the former, changing the shape of the shoulder, changing the angle of attack and things like that. So, yeah, that I mean, because the first step in developing new packaging for us anyway was, does it is it going to give us the require is it going to the first step, product quality. Is it going to keep the product quality? Is it going to retain the freshness, the crunch, the taste, the smell? And that seems like the hardest bit, but bizarrely, it getting once you get that done, you think, okay, the rest is going to be easy. But the second bit, which is the machinability, it was just as hard, if not harder.
I think that's a really important point you've put there. And again, there'll be many people who are developing packaging who would be listening to this, and this will really be important when people are listening. That it's not just the creation; it's also the conversion
Yeah,
that is going to have a challenge.
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I know that you have limited time, so I'm going to pivot quickly towards funding. And I know that you crowdfunded initially, and then you raised money. What I wanted to ask was, if you have investors, how do they take this whole idea of you sticking your guns to, I'm going to use sustainable packaging and other sustainability measures? Is that a positive thing from the investor's perspective, or do you find a few challenges in those conversations?
I think it depends on the investor. I mean, there are some investors, in any business, that only care about one thing, and that's the bottom line, right? But there are other investors who, actively will only invest in businesses that have, businesses with purpose. So it's a mixed bag, I would say. It's a mixed bag. But I think, generally we have a very, very supportive investor base. And, I think, if, if for nothing else, if nothing else, investors appreciate the fact that we're trying to do things differently.
That's good to hear. What about international growth? When do we find your crisps in where I'm sitting, United States or the rest of the world? Do you have plans for that? How are you planning to go beyond the British Isles?
Yeah, we already do. So we do export. We do export around the globe. We haven't cracked the States yet. That's a scary market, the United States. Let's face it. I think there are enough crisp brands over there to last a lifetime. So, although we are, I've always looked at it, and I'm speaking to a chap in the States now. Actually, his name's George. He's a great guy. In case he's listening, but we export. We did a lot of export to Europe, mainland Europe, but Brexit really dented that. It's, and let's not make this a Brexit conversation, because we've all had enough of those, I think. But we export to the Middle East. We've got a great company we work with in Kuwait who handle the Middle East for us. We export to the Far East. We even export to Australia, would you believe? So I'll try and get them to the United States as soon as I can, Ved, for you.
Superb. I'll carry my own box when I see you this summer. I have to try all your vegan crisps.
Are you going to Rethinking Materials again in May?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So
yes.
I'll see you there.
I hope you're going to be there.
I
we
am.
Want to show you our.
I'm
we
doing.
want to show you our new packaging, which will be aluminum free and ready to roll. I'm excited.
It'll be what free?
Aluminum free.
Aluminum free.
Aluminum
okay, cool.
free. So and we've now gotten. We are definitely going to be under 2 WVTR. So that's we've gotten to 1.6 in some of our trials. So,
and what about OTR?
We're getting there.
What about OTR?
OTR has never been a challenge, so that we can get down anyway. So OTR is the WVTR is where it's the challenge, and that's
WVTR is the challenge. Yeah,
aluminum. The biopolymers are able to do a good job with OTR. The challenge is that the polymers, because ultimately they're bio, right? Everything breathes. So the challenge becomes the WVTR, the moisture resistance. But we are getting there. We are very close now. So I'm hoping that by May, I'm going to be able to show you something. And your amazing converter, who I just loved having a conversation with you last year, and he was so keen to kind of take trials. You guys were just such...
Daniel. Yeah.
Breath of fresh air and just this desire to do good. It was I would say that was a huge highlight for us, just the uplift that came from that conversation, because it was coming from a customer and the customer's customer perspective, a converter and a final customer, who were encouraging a company that, guys, do this and I'm going to consume 20,000 tons a year kind of thing. So that was huge for us. So we are definitely hoping to be able to present better and better packaging. And I know from a listener's perspective, there are so many people out there who are working on this. So I'm hoping that you'll get more and more options as you go along.
Great. All right. Well, I look forward to seeing you there. I'm not sure what yet, but I've been invited to speak on one of those panels again. So I'll see you there.
Super. I look forward to listening. And that takes me towards my final kind of 2 questions. In an ideal world, if as you scale, where would you like to see the British Snack Company in the next 5 years? And that could include Awfully Posh as well, your business. Where do you see it in terms of numbers, whatever way you want to, whatever way you kind of dream?
I mean, the snack market is so big that we're never going to be number one in terms of size. We're a small business. Our goal is to grow to £10 million in revenue in the next couple of years. If the sustainable packaging can help us get there, then great. I mean, in an industry that's £2 billion in the UK, we're always and dominated by some very big players. We're always going to be a small part of it. But there's a little part of me that just hopes that what we can do is at least spark other brands to into action and make them more sustainable. Because if us as a very small brand, are moving first on things like sustainable packaging, then I think that's a pretty sad indictment of the industry, really, because it's these big brands with big budgets that should be moving first and should be leading the market, but they're not. And so we're doing our bit.
Superb. And the final one, what does good garbage mean to you?
I think what it means to me is generally paper, I think generally paper. That's what I've learned over the past few years, is that paper is a really sustainable material. But I think it also means big companies and consumers collectively working together to recycle better.
Thank you so much, Tom. This has been a joy, and like I said just before, that it is so wonderful as a producer of packaging to see people who are so passionate about doing right. Thank you for being you. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing, and thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure, Ved. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Good Garbage podcast. Follow us on social media to never miss an episode. Links are in the description below. I'm your host, Ved Krishna. See you next time.